Well, over the sort of preceding year or so, the volcano has been experiencing an increased frequency of earthquakes, relatively shallow in the crust beneath the summit of the volcano, which is about 4.2 kilometers above sea level. In addition to that, there are satellite measurements of the sort of shape of the volcano, as well as measurements on the ground, both of which indicated the volcano was starting to inflate, which is oftentimes a signature that we see when magma moves into the volcano from beneath it and suggests the potential for an eruption.
How long do you expect this lava flow to continue, and at what point does it become a threat to the community?
So Mauna Loa eruptions can vary in terms of their duration as well as the spatial areas on the volcano that they erupt. But the typical Mauna Loa eruption, especially the last few, for instance, 1975, 1984, is sort of 2 to 3 week affairs. And the longer the eruption proceeds, the more likelihood there is that lava could flow from high up on the volcano where it is currently being emitted to the population centers, which are mostly on the coast.
So the other unusual thing, Ken, is that it's erupting at the same time as the more well-known volcano Kilauea, which is, about 30 kilometres away. How significant is this?
This is rather significant for us in the historical record of observations, which is nearly 200 years long. The two volcanoes are very rarely erupting at the same time. Interestingly enough, when Mauna Loa last erupted in 1984, the very long duration, 35-year-long Pu'u'o'o eruption of Kilauea had just initiated the year before in 1983. But right now, you can stand near the Kilauea summit and take a photograph with molten lava from both of the two volcanoes. And as far as I can imagine, that's probably the only place on the planet where that is possible, at least today. There aren't many other locations where this would happen. So it is a rather unusual occurrence.
Yeah. You know, mostly when you see a volcano erupting, you see people running in the opposite direction, but people are coming to see this extraordinary sight. How much of a problem is it for local authorities?
Well, I mean, I would caveat my answer by saying that volcanoes are always dangerous and unpredictable. However, some more so than others. And people often joke about Mauna Loa and Kilauea as being drive-up volcanoes. In terms of the entire spectrum of volcanic activity, they are at the safer, more predictable, and less dangerous end of things. But that by no means means they aren't extremely dangerous places. And this is a common occurrence in Hawaii when we have an eruption in a place that is approachable, because sometimes the locations are too remote for people to get to. People will come regardless of what the authorities do to try and prevent it. And sometimes they do get in the way. There are efforts now where the eruption is happening is really rather remote. It is not served by main roads. There's very limited parking. It's very high elevation. There are absolutely no services, no petrol, no food for many tens of kilometers from there. And so there are efforts underway to try and organize people and keep them out. But because or at least at a safe distance, but because the eruption area is so widely spaced, it's nearly impossible to keep people from everywhere. Although I haven't heard of any specific problems, they could certainly occur. They have occurred in the past, and we just, hope and ask for all of our tourists as well as our residents to be respectful and to use as much precaution as possible when they're visiting the volcano. We want people to be able to view and experience it, but from a safe distance.
Yeah, and I'm interested that you use the word respectful. What is the cultural significance of these volcanoes to Hawaii?
They're very significant to Hawaiians. Indigenous Hawaiians place an embodiment of the gods and spirits into almost all natural phenomena that occur here, whether they're winds or storms or waterfalls. The volcanoes hold a very special significance in the Hawaiian culture because they are thought of as providing life to the land. They are the place from which everything else, or the entity from which everything else in Hawaii springs. And so indigenous Hawaiians are, rightfully very concerned about things that happen that could potentially be disrespectful. I won't list what they are, but you can imagine, things that people might do, dipping things in the lava, etc., that disrespect these deities. And so I think it's incumbent upon all of us, whether we personally hold those beliefs or not, to understand that the original inhabitants of this land place great reverence in the volcanoes, especially when they're erupting, and we need to respect that.
Yeah. Ken, what as scientists do you look for to help enhance your research when you have an opportunity like this?
There are so many different questions that we have as scientists, and I would put them into sort of two main categories. One of them has to do with hazards, how we understand the hazards of volcanoes, how we predict eruptions, how we alert the public about them, how eruptions progress, how we can predict their progression. And then there are kind of more fundamental science questions, such as how and why did this particular magma that's being erupted now get put together? There was this very long period of time between the last eruption. Does that mean that this eruption is containing more complex materials, more gas, more crystals, less gas, less crystals, different sizes and shapes that affect not only how the magma erupts, but how it flows as lava on land surface? And is that changing in space or time? And the only way to answer these questions is to be out there collecting specimens while the eruption is happening, because many of the very earliest samples or materials that erupted give us some very important clues. And if we're not there to pick them up, they subsequently get buried by additional eruptions, and then we no longer have access to those materials.
Really fascinating stuff, Ken. Great to chat, and we'll watch with interest as it plays out. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Aloha from Hawaii.